Russian occupation forces are continuing to focus their efforts on 5 key fronts in Ukraine, with Ukraine's defense forces repelling 28 Russian assaults in those areas. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Information is of 6 o'clock on the 26th of May. Quote from the General Staff: "The enemy continues to focus their main efforts on the Kupiansk, Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka fronts. A total of 28 meeting engagements took place on these fronts." Details: Over the course of the past 24 hours, Russian forces carried out 30 airstrikes and deployed multiple launch rocket systems (MLRS) in further 39 attacks on Ukrainian armed forces positions and civilian settlements. On the Severshina and Slobozhanshina fronts, Russian forces conducted an airstrike on Unikivka, Sumy Oblast, and deployed mortars and artillery to fire on Krinivka, Kodivka and Yenjulivka, Chernihiv Oblast, Bunyakine, Balfin, Shpyl, Pavlivka, Kindrativka, Oleksivka and Unikivka, Sumy Oblast, and Udi, Veteranarn, Liptsi, Zelin, Ohertsev, Hatish, Vovchansk, Budarki and Zemlyanki, Kharkiv Oblast. Russian troops are trying to improve their tactical positions on the Kupiansk front, and failed to advance in Mashutivka. Russian aircraft struck areas in and around Kyslivka. The Russians also deployed mortars and artillery to fire on Stroivka, Kamyanka, Krasny Persh, Rydkota, Vorokna, Zapadna, Tabevka and Berestov, Kharkiv Oblast, and Stelmakivka, Luhansk Oblast. Russian forces did not undertake any offensive operations on the Lyman front, but conducted an airstrike on areas in the vicinity of Dubrova and Sheldnevsky and Bilohorivka, Luhansk Oblast, and Torsky and Spirnt, Donetsk Oblast. On the Bakhmut front, Russian forces made an unsuccessful attempt to advance on Ivanovsky. Russian aircraft struck areas in and around Bilahora, Vashukivka, Orikovo-Vasilivka, Marko, Hurahorivka, Bakhmut, Ivanovsky, Stupochki, Kostantinivka, Bilahora, Terest, Pivnikny, Pivden and New York. Donetsk Oblast came under Russian fire. Russian forces attempted to advance on Novokulinov and Avdiivka on the Avdiivka front, but were unsuccessful. Over the course of the day, Russian aircraft struck areas in and around Novokulinov, Stepov and Avdiivka. Russian forces also shelled areas in and around Novokulinov, Avdiivka, Karlivka, Pervomaisk and Netailov. Donetsk Oblast. On the Marinka front, Ukraine's defense forces repelled numerous Russian assaults near the city of Marinka. Russian forces conducted airstrikes in the vicinity of Hyorhivka and Kurakov and shelled Krasnohorivka, Marinka, Novomykhailivka and Pobeda. Donetsk Oblast. On the Shakhtarsk front, Russian forces shelled Vodian, Vuhledar and Vlika Novosilka. Russian forces are on the defensive on the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts. They shelled Vremivka and Novosilka. Donetsk Oblast, Olhaivsky, Malinivka, Huliaipol, Huliaipilsky, Novosilivka, Omelnik, Bilahiria, Malotokmichka and Kamyansk, Zaporizhia Oblast, and Mykhailivka, Novoshainsk, Belatensk and the city of Kherson, Kherson Oblast. Over the course of today, Ukrainian aircraft carried out 7 airstrikes on areas where Russian military personnel and equipment were concentrated. Ukraine's defense forces downed 3 Russian Shahed attack drones and an Orlan-10 reconnaissance drone. Units of Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck 2 areas where Russian military personnel and equipment were concentrated, 4 ammunition storage points, an electronic warfare system, 4 field artillery units, and 4 other critical military targets. The General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces reported on May 26 that Russia has lost 205,720 troops in Ukraine since the beginning of its full-scale invasion, with an estimated 460 casualties on May 25. Sad reality: the Ukraine war is now going Russia's way. From almost the opening days of the Russia-Ukraine war, a running theme among Western analysts has been that the Russian military has badly underperformed and the Ukrainian armed forces constantly exceeded expectations. Few seem to have noticed, however, that the pendulum on the battlefield has shifted. Shift for Russia in Ukraine. Recent evidence indicates the Russian side has made tactical and operational improvements that are having an impact on the ground in Ukraine. Washington policymakers need to update their understanding of the current trajectory of the war to ensure the U.S. is not caught off guard by battlefield events, and that our interests don't suffer as a result. There has been no shortage of legitimate evidence to support the contention that throughout 2022 the Russian side performed much worse than most expected and that Ukraine performed better than anticipated. Russia's initial battle plan was flawed at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Moscow allocated an invasion force that was too small for the task, dispersed across 4 axes of advance, ensuring that none would be strong enough to succeed on its own, and was not equipped with supplies to sustain a long war. Ukraine was more prepared for an invasion than many originally believed and took impressive action quickly to stem the Russian advance, blunting each axis, and imposing serious casualties on the invaders. In contrast to Russian blunders, Zelensky's troops initially performed well at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels such that Russia was forced into a major withdrawal of the bulk of its armored forces from Kyiv and Kharkiv barely a month into the war. Russian deployments. It was a logical and rational strategic decision for Russia to redeploy its forces to strengthen the Donbas front in April 2022. But even then, ample evidence began to pile up that tactically, there were still grave weaknesses in the Russian forces, such as the infamous May 2022 crossing of the Seversky Donetsk River, which saw an entire battalion wiped out. All the news wasn't bad for Russia, however, as through the month of July Putin's forces captured a number of key cities. After repositioning its forces, Russia captured Mariupol, Lyman, Popasna, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk. But exposing Russia's ongoing operational weaknesses, Ukrainian forces launched 2 offensives, one of which caught Russia completely by surprise, resulting in the recapture of Lyman. The first was in the Kherson province, which started off badly for Ukraine. But while all Moscow's attention was on Kherson, Ukraine unleashed a major drive north near Kharkiv. Back and forth continues. Russian leaders had been asleep at the wheel, focusing all of their attention on Kherson and literally ignoring Kharkiv, trying to secure their northern flank with a paltry number of minimally trained National Guardsmen. Ukraine exploited this mistake and drove Russian troops back over 100 kilometers to the Svatovo-Kreminna line. While still reeling from this blow, Russia faced a dilemma in Kherson city: fight a bloody defensive battle in the city or surrender it without a fight. Russia chose the latter. By October, Russian leaders were being ridiculed in the West as having been seriously wounded by Ukraine's twin offensives, and talk of a Ukrainian victory picked up steam, with former U.S. Army General Ben Hodges claiming Ukraine could win the war by the end of the year, 2022. As of November 2022, it was fair to say the Russian General Staff had been outperformed by the Ukrainian General Staff. Many pundits in the West concluded that Russian troops and leaders were deeply flawed and incapable of improving, believing that Russia would remain incapable tactically for the duration of the war. What many of these analysts failed to recognize, however, is that Russia has vastly more capacity to make war, both in terms of material and personnel, and therefore has the capacity to absorb enormous losses and still remain viable. Further, Russian history is replete with examples of starting out poorly in wars, suffering large casualties, and then recovering to turn the tide. Ukraine, on the other hand, has significantly fewer resources or troops and therefore has less room for error.